Well, I think we'll go ahead and get started. I know we're missing quite a few folks. I don't know where they're at this morning. I think we're expecting about another 12 folks here in the building. But anyways, cognizant of your time, want to make sure that we keep on schedule. So first of all, thanks for being here and participating at this legislative recap. I will say it was an eventful year. We'll get through some of the details that we have outlined for the program today, but again, want to just give you as membership a opportunity to see what your association is doing on your behalf. We're recording this event, so if you would like to view it at a later date or maybe share it with some of the other folks within your office and your family at large, that'd be available on our YouTube page. So anyways, again, thanks for being here. I want to just really quickly, I'll introduce Joe Mcallister is right here as well. And then Brad, they actually serve on our legislative committee. Joe is in-house counsel for Hughes General Counsel and is a great resource to our committee from the legislative perspective, particularly on a legal sense, knowing how many of the pieces of legislation that we review as a committee each and every week, it has an impact within the construction industry. Some of the other folks, Levi Clegg, who is the COO of Jacobson Construction. He's your legislative committee chair. He apologizes. He was unable to be with us. He had a previous work assignment that took him out of town this week. So he apologizes for not being here. I will also mention that we as an AGC, or you as an AGC, have two hired legal what I'd say full-time lobbyists that work on Capitol Hill day in and day out. Chris Kyler and Mike Ostemiller. I will say you have hired the best of the best on Capitol Hill. They are phenomenal folks and are a great asset to the AGC and provide us access in some cases where we're not able to obtain it otherwise. I will say that we are not only well received on the Hill with those two folks, but I myself, as well as Rich Thorne, are registered lobbyists for the organization, and our nearly 100 years of reputation carry a lot of weight on Capitol Hill. We are the go-to construction resource for the legislative body, and Brad can probably attest to that. His brother Kay Christofferson is a great representative on Capitol Hill, and there's nobody better on Capitol Hill with regards to respect in the construction industry than AGC. So thanks to your skill, integrity, and responsibility that really have a tremendous impact on the state legislature and folks trusting what our opinions are as industry. So anyways, just wanted to recognize those folks as well. Just to get started, this session was unique in a lot of ways. COVID had a tremendous impact on this legislative session. There were a number of pieces of legislation that kind of evolved around that from the experience that we had this last year during the pandemic. But probably the biggest impact, I would say, for us as lobbyists and for the folks trying to receive that access is the first week of the session was closed to the general public. That is the first time in the 24 years of my experience lobbying on Capitol Hill that that has happened where public has not been allowed. Typically, during any legislative session, you have just droves and droves of school buses that come up with kids and youth walking all over the Capitol. You have various interest groups up there, and it's just a beehive of interest and activity on Capitol Hill. And this year it was scarcely quiet. It was odd, to say the least, when you go up there. Nobody was gathered in the halls. Nobody was in attendance. The first week it was closed was, of course, due to the concerns of rioting and the political unrest that was there initially in the first week to keep security. But after that first week, they did open it back up to the public, but it was very limited, what I would say, as far as attendance. So they were asking us as lobbyists and as groups that were interested to do most of that virtually online. Some of the legislative body they were to be tested every 2 weeks. I am aware of only about 4 that tested positive within that first week. And after that first week, they kind of kept it under control after that. And so to that extent, it was a great success with regards to the pandemic and the outbreak of COVID there on Capitol Hill. And so they had some great success that way. I will also just say, you know, thanks to the legislative body, they give of their time and of course their talents and abilities and sacrifice a lot of their personal life to serve. And we're grateful for their service and the work that they do on Capitol Hill. I would say from a state perspective, I think for the most part, most of our legislative group are trying to do the right thing. I don't think anyone's up there intentionally trying to mess things up for the state of Utah. I think they're doing what's in the best interest of their constituents. And we, of course, as a group have an opportunity to sometimes say, I think you're doing the wrong thing. And sometimes we have the opportunity to say, man, great concept, great idea. And we'll share a little bit of those. This year, the state was successful. They passed a $23.5 billion budget, which again continues to grow each and every year. But significant budget increase this year, as well as budgets passed. Every single year, without fail, it gravitates to about this same number. But there were 1,216 bills proposed this year. There are about 767 of those that actually made it through legislative research and general counsel and were actually drafted. And of those, really only 502 of those passed of that legislative number of bills. For whatever reason, that tends to be about the same numbers every single year. It's just kind of unique that it gravitates to that each year. But at the end of the day, that's what we had passed as far as legislation this year. So I really want to kind of just outline kind of what I would say are the highlights. I'm going to kind of touch on a few things on where I say the focuses were this year for this legislative session. I'd say COVID-19, education, tax cuts, projects, and infrastructure spending. I would say that those were kind of some of the major highlights for this session. And with those in mind, under the COVID-19 really being the first one to talk there, there were a number of what I'd say bills to kind of rein in the governor's powers during a state of emergency. And you'll see some of those highlighted, I think, in the news and the media. But again, that is a direct impact from COVID and what they've seen over the last year. Under that, you kind of had, they set some limits on public health orders. So under this legislative session, after 30 days of a pandemic, the legislature can step in and revoke any of the public health orders that have been issued and rein in any of the executive orders that maybe the governor would set forth during a future pandemic if there happened to be one. And again, those are kind of direct results over Governor Herbert's, what I would say, stewardship over the pandemic in the last year. With that said, I want to say publicly that I think Governor Herbert personally handled the pandemic very well, in my opinion, and the state legislature. But I think that there were some legislators and some folks out there that felt that some of that powers that maybe the governor had needed to be reined in, or maybe more consultation with legislature. And so I see you've seen that during this session. As you've heard in the media, Representative Ray, he had a Senate Bill 208 was called the Endgame Bill. That was a negotiated bill that had kind of been worked on with the legislature, with the governor, as well as the county health type folks. That's not one that we necessarily tracked as an organization, as members of the AGC. But that's the one you've been hearing the most about in the media now, which has the effective date of April 10th being the mask mandate will officially be ended here in the state of Utah. What that means exactly as that evolves, I have heard and continue to hear within the media on that. If it's groups larger than 50, you'll still be required in close proximity to wear masks. But as you've heard also in groups lower or less than that, of course, that doesn't apply. But I think you'll probably hear more and see more of that as that continues to roll out. The other one I would say tied to the COVID-19, if you remember last year under Governor Herbert's use of what was called the emergency procurement, he spent in proximity about $108 million for technology, COVID emergency relief type stuff, such as masks, hand sanitation, those types of things. They passed a bill this legislative session that sets a 30-day cap on those bid limits. So at the end of the day, the governor would still have that emergency procurement, if you will, but after 30 days, that would then expire. And of course, they'd have to go from that point forward. So again, just a little bit on the COVID-19. I think that had kind of an overtone of this session with regards to some of the legislation that was passed early on. The other one that maybe I'll just mention in AGC, it's on your tracking sheet. I should have mentioned, you should have the 3 documents in the back. You have the tracking sheet, which is pretty colorful there with the AGC position and the final status of those. In addition, you have some additional documents in there, but I will say that there was one bill on the tracking sheet that had a direct impact from COVID-19, and that was Senate Bill 208. And so if you look on your tracking sheet there, that was Senator Kennedy. And maybe so you're not listening to me the entire time, I maybe invite Joe Mcallister to help with some of the dialogue on that. But Senate Bill 208 was Senator Kennedy. And maybe I'll just have Joe mention a little bit about that, kind of the impact I think that it initially was going to have on construction, and particularly with our AGC membership and the position that we took on opposition to that. Now, after that was all said and done, it got watered down to really what I would say an anti-vaccine type bill, but needless to say, did not pass either body of the House or Senate. And maybe Joe could just touch on that, on why AGC took the position of oppose initially and the impacts on our membership.
Okay, so SB 208, there were some, well-meaning folks who went to Senator Kennedy and they said, hey, look, we don't want to be forced to wear masks if that's going to present, a problem for us at work if we refuse. And so they had asked that he just run a bill, and they, shepherded it along, that said an employer cannot require a mask in any situation for any reason, whether it's intended to affect their health or mental health or anything else. Unfortunately, they were just not aware that in the construction industry and in the mining industry, there are a number of situations where we have to require our employees to wear masks. But this was just a lop it off, a blanket, no exceptions bill. And we went to them and said, hey, listen, we have to wear dust masks. We have to wear masks for silica, benzene, and all kinds of things, right? They said they were unwilling to compromise on that point. It was just, that was the hill they were willing to die on and not going to change. So we opposed it pretty strongly. And eventually, I think the AGC and others were able to kind of convince the committee that, or at least the leadership, that this is a bad idea for the construction industry. We're going to create a number of follow-on problems. And it didn't go anywhere. Something that I think if it obviously would have come up for a vote real early and quickly would have passed, and then we would have been dealing with a little bit of a disaster. But it was changed to basically be, you can't require anybody to take a vaccine, which is already the current federal law. So no harm, no foul there.
Hey, Joe, touch a little bit on the medical procedure definition in there too, which had, again, that unintended consequence in the legislation.
And again, so in the effort to prevent an employer from mandating an employee taking a vaccine, which at the time we are unaware of any single employer in Utah who has doing that. And obviously it is not allowed by law. The approval of the vaccines, the conditional approvals states as a condition that it can't be mandatory, even for healthcare workers. But in order to encompass that entire the vaccine and any iteration of it that comes along, they created a new definition of a medical procedure that was so broad that it would have included your effort to take a post-accident drug screening test. It would have included any requirement that you have for someone to get physical therapy in order to return to work after a workers' comp injury. Even potentially a medical evaluation would not be, they could just opt out and refuse. So if you had a situation where a person had a hurt back and you are allowed under the law to tell them they need to go to 12 sets of physical therapy in order to return to work and then see what happens, take that conservative approach. Under this, they could have just said no and just remained unable to work. And there's nothing that you could do about that. And so it extended into so many areas, not intentionally by them. It was just a fact of, not to quote Donald Rumsfeld, but sometimes you don't know what you don't know. And they just didn't know. They didn't realize the impact that would have on the construction industry particularly. And luckily we found some folks that would listen.
Oh, thank you, Joe, for summarizing that. So again, that's the focus early on the COVID-19 impacts on our folks, and again, some significant legislation I think that would have had a terrific or a substantial impact on our folks. We were able to successfully, with us and other groups, get that legislation killed. So as I mentioned, it was ended up being watered down after we had expressed our concerns from an industry and other folks, down to an anti-vaccine bill that ultimately did not pass either bodies of the legislature. I will mention that there is even though it does not have that for the private sector on the mandated vaccine provision, there was a bill that passed that could mandate for state employees and state folks have the vaccine. So if one of the state employee agencies requires that of their employment, that is now legal under another bill that was passed during this session.
Does that include teachers?
Well, that's just employees of the state. So no, to my knowledge, would not mean a teacher. So again, that's on the COVID-19. The other one that I would say was probably one of the significant winners of this session was, of course, education. You've heard a lot about that in the news and media. They approved during this session $475 million in new money for education. The primary focus of that is, you've heard also through the media, is $1,500 bonuses for educators, as well as $1,000 bonuses for staff. And so that's a significant piece of that particular $475 million. And of course, other funding sources there for education to help students. So I'd say those, again, as far as significant winners, that was a big win for the education folks this year. The other one I wanted to talk a little bit about was tax cuts. Again, most of these are not on the tracking sheets, again, because they don't have that direct impact with our membership. But this year they had $100 million in targeted tax cuts for the state of Utah and for citizens that are paying Utah state tax. There's really the dependent exemption for families that is now back on as far as exemptions. And then the other big one I would say there is the Social Security military retirement pay is also tax exempt. And that's the lion's share of the $100 million tax cut for Utahns, is really those two components or pieces. Unfortunately, we got a number of calls and had a lot of discussion on the tax the state of Utah is imposing on the federal PPP money. I know that there are a number of agency members that were able to receive some PP funds through the federal government. And if you're not aware, I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news. You will pay a Utah state tax on the federal money received. We had a lot of discussion with leadership on that early on. We were told on numerous occasions by the governor, leadership of the House and the Senate, give up that battle and that fight. And so with that said, we didn't want to jeopardize a lot of some of the other stuff that we were working on, some significant funding for transportation and infrastructure. We elected to kind of back down from that argument. There were a number of other groups. We participated on an organization. You're a part of what's called the Utah Business Coalition on Capitol Hill. It's about 14 industry leading groups, such as the Utah Manufacturer Association, Utah Farm Bureau, the Utah Mining Association, Utah Food Retailers Association, a number of other associations and groups that have a broad brush with business that were in opposition to that concept and proposal. And again, not only were we, but that group was told as well, back down. So unfortunately, we're not going to be able to get that tax exemption, if you will, from a state funding standpoint.
Joey, was there a number floated about how much that would bring to the state coffers, the tax on the PPP?
About 200 million. So there was some numbers around 400 to maybe 200 million, but probably more on that 200 million dollar side was what the tax implementations were for those that received that. Again, really what it came down to, there was a couple of different, what I would say, philosophies. The analogy that we kept hearing was if some popular talk show hosts, I'm not going to say a name, but if they gave you a vehicle or a car, and then all you were required to do then was to pay the tax on that car that was given to you, would you give up the car? That was the analogy that kept being utilized. The other concern that they had from a, what I'd say from a legislative and standpoint was they felt like there were winners and losers in that scenario. There were those that received the PP funds and those that didn't receive the PP funds. So to receive a tax credit to those that received them and not be able to offer anything to those that did not was part of that dilemma or that argument. The other, as we talked to the membership and as a legislative committee continued to debate the PP fund tax liability and the fight on that, the other analogy that I heard, which was a good one, is again, they gave you the car, burned the car, and then want you to pay tax on the car from a government standpoint. That was kind of the argument against the free car analogy. But at the end of the day, that was a fight that, again, we just didn't feel as an association it was worth going up and dying on the sword to only be basically slaughtered and still lose the fight. So that was the position we took there. So any questions on any of the two items we talked about so far, which is COVID, or sorry, the three: COVID, education, and tax? Any questions at all there? The next one is, as I mentioned, primary focus, I think this legislative session was really projects and infrastructure spending. There were a number of the bills that we were tracking and involved with. You should have an attachment that is included, which is HB 433, entitled Amendments and Related to Infrastructure Funding. This was a Representative Schultz bill, and I would say a huge win for the AGC and the AGC membership. I've given you a comprehensive breakdown of the impact of that bill for the industry and the positive that will have on the industry. If I had anything negative to say about it, is that it wasn't what it originally was set out to be. It was initially, as we were reviewing it as a committee, I will say that many of the funding type bills typically come out that last week of the session. because that's when they're looking at what they historically call the bill of bills, which are all of the funding bills kind of rolled into one, and funding of all the state agencies and groups. And then also looking at what other funds they're willing to spend and wanting to spend. All of that kind of rolls out that last week of the session. And this was no exception to the typical rule. But the last week of the session, this bill rolled out. It was supposed to be a $2.3 billion funding bill, of which was $1.2 billion in new bonding for roads and projects. As that went through the process, I no sooner had our committee meeting on Thursday, and I was like, hey, look at this. Now I warned you. I said, hey, it's probably going to change. It may change. So don't quote me on this, but we were super excited on Thursday. And then come Friday, it was like, oh, shoot, it's not the 2.3. It got whittled down to a mere 1.2, about a $1.1 billion bill. And again, that's outlined in the program there, but as you can see on the outline, that generates about $890 million roughly in new funding, and of that new funding is one-time funding. And that is going to go to fund a lot of what I would say TIF projects, about 16, if I remember right. And I've given you a detailed list of what those TIF projects are for those that do the road construction type projects, highways and roads. And I've outlined that list there. In addition to that, you had about $269 million in funding for UTA, double tracking, and transit type projects. And that's bonded money. We had an opportunity to meet and discuss this legislation with Carlos Becerras, Director of UDOT, during that week. And the positive and good news on that is that this will fund all of the priority projects for UDOT until 2030. There was going to be about a 2-year cliff as they're paying back some of the previous bonds and other things, that there was going to be a lull in construction there in that 2-year period. This puts all of that funding in place to see that through to completion to the 2030 year. With that said, we are in a great position as the state of Utah on our bonding limits. There's a self-imposed 50% bond limit here in the state of Utah that the legislature has imposed upon themselves. I want to say we're about that at the 30% range right now. And as this money goes through and we continue to pay back those bonds, we'll probably be just below that 30% self-imposed bond limit. And so as we look at future legislation here in the coming years, that ability to continue to bond is always going to be on the table as we're looking down the road at future construction and projects. So that's a positive note from that perspective. And so again, a terrific win, I think, for our organization and for the association and those folks that they're out there building roads and infrastructure, that funding's now going to take us down to 2030. Brett.
What was the final number for that one-time funding?
So that bill total on the
one-time funds that the legislature.
in this piece of legislation or overall? Overall, it was about if I remember right, it was about a $2 billion, what I would say, just under $2 billion is what was available as what I called maybe surplus. Maybe that's a bad terminology to use. But most of that, a lot of that obviously was gobbled up with all of the ask. Again, if there was a fun point in the legislative session in the Senate, one of our good senators said, it was about 12 o'clock on Friday, noon. He said, the bank is officially closed. So that was a comment from the Senate floor. He said, the bank is officially closed. So if you don't have your funding bills on the calendar by noon, the money's done. And so what they do is they go through and prioritize all of the legislation that's been requested for funding. They then, as the appropriations committee, then take a look at that and say, okay, what are the funds remaining out of all of the bill requests? And of, again, the $896 million or so that was in this bill as a one-time funding, as again, was part of that large picture of the about $2 billion that was, I would say was excess at the time. So again, a big chunk of that went this direction, which was a good win for the organization. But again, it kind of shows what the priority was again for the legislative session. As I mentioned, again, it was really education, tax cuts, and transportation and infrastructure funding. That was really the three priorities for the government this year and for the state of Utah. And again, that was, I think, evident in this legislation that was passed. The other ones I'll mention is you had $75 million spending bill for the inland port. It's really looking at some of those outlying communities that want to kind of be a part of that funding or part of that inland port process. So there's, again, some money there. There's the announcement of 2 state parks. Again, I'm not necessarily on our tracking sheet, but that was House Bill 250, or yeah, House Bill 257. That's a $36 million funding bill for the Utah Raptor State Park, just outside of Moab. And then the other project there is the Lost Creek State Park at Lost Creek Reservoir. Those will be under the preview of DFCM as far as those state parks with regards to those. The other one that I'll mention for DFCM projects, there's Senate Bill 143. This is a revenue bond for, I want to say there were about 6 DFCM projects. They're outlined in your tracking sheet. You can see what those projects are. But they're for higher ed, 2 University of Utah projects, 1 project at Weber State, also a Utah State project, a couple of state alcohol projects, or state liquor store, I should say. You can tell I don't go to the state liquor store. So anyways, state liquor store projects, but that's a $250 million bond for those projects. So those members that are doing DFCM type project and type work, that's again, a terrific win there for some of those projects. Outlined in the, what is affectionately called the Bill of Bills. Again, those roll out about the last week. It's the funding resources for DOT, DFCM, all of the state agencies. We had a meeting with Jim Russell, the director of DFCM, right after the session, that Monday after the session. As that bill, or as that kind of gets sifted out and they see the funding sources coming in there. If you remember in last year's session during the pandemic, they kind of put a halt on some of the funding that DFCM had last year that they needed to shift over to the state prison. All of that funding is now being put back into DFCM. There's about roughly, and again, the conversation we had with him, about another $200 million potentially in DFCM funding, in addition to the $250 million bond here that will begin to continue to kind of roll out. And he's he is committed to have kind of a funding and project discussion with the AGC membership. So look forward to that information coming out, and we'll notify the membership when he'll be meeting with us to talk about specific projects and get more in detail with the funding available to DFCM for building vertical building projects. I will mention that Carlos Becerras will be meeting with the AGC membership on April 14th here at 8:30 here in our building here to talk about transportation funding, the bond, and then the projects that they see potentially being approved by the Transportation Commission as they look at the funding sources available there and start prioritizing those projects for the state of Utah. Any questions all on the projects and infrastructure side of the legislation?
Do you have any idea of timeline?
That's probably, I'm going to say probably here in the next, we're meeting with Carlos probably in April. I'm going to say probably, my guess is probably about that same time frame, probably about mid-April is when that probably will happen. Any other questions? Let's see. let me just go through, I'm not going to go through all of the tracking sheet. I'd encourage you to look at it. If there's questions you have on any specific bills, ask those as you have them. But let me just refer to the tracking sheet now and just share some, what I would say, bills that were of interest to the legislative committee and us as an AGC, and particularly you as AGC members. The House Bill 137 was the infrastructure commercial vehicles. Representative Christopherson was the sponsor of this legislation. What that does is again, you that are out there that have commercial fleets of vehicles that are out traveling on the roads, what this does is it changes the weight limit requirement for those vehicles that are being licensed as commercial vehicles. As you currently know, that weight limit is anything above 10,001 pounds is registered as a commercial vehicle. And of course, you're then subject to CDL licensure, hours of service, those types of things. Under this bill, Representative Christopherson combined another Senate bill that was also running that you have on your tracking sheet. But what this does under this bill, it increases the weight limit. Again, I just want to make sure this is interstate. So again, if you're in the state of Utah, this would, of course, cover those commercial vehicle weight limits. But what's that? Yeah. Oh, sorry. Did I say it wrong? Thank you. Intrastate. But anyways, it increases the weight limits to an individual vehicle, if I remember right, 16,000 and anything above 16,000 pounds for a single vehicle. A combined weight of single vehicle and trailer weight is anything 26,000 pounds or more. So again, that should have a great impact for us as AGC members and your vehicle fleets out there to help in those regards. So again, good win for AGC membership. Great. Yeah. Yeah, May 5th.
You'll need those magnets on the side of your superintendent truck.
I'm gonna be sad too. Those look so good on my truck. Not kidding. That's right. So yeah, great question. May 5th. The other one, I'll turn over to Joe Mcallister, is House Bill 355. I will say of all of the legislation that we have been involved with and have ran over the years, 355 is probably the most significant win, I think, for the industry in a long time. And in large part, I would like to thank Joe for kind of spearheading and assisting with this effort on 355. So I'll have Joe just talk about that a little bit. And you should have an attachment in your documents. Again, another colored single page document there to help you on that discussion.
Yeah, I owe you two apologies. Number one, I made this on a big HD computer screen. Wasn't supposed to print out that small and unreadable. We can email you the file, but just have a pencil because I'm about to save you guys millions of dollars and a lot of hassle. Because even though the construction industry for so long had focused on mechanics lien litigation, the reality is for the last several years in Utah, the most common lawsuit filed against general contractors and to a large extent subcontractors is a personal injury lawsuit from the injured employees of one of the subcontractors on your job site. Because we had this problem with Utah law. We had three very clear, distinctive scenarios in which on a construction site, you could be considered an eligible employer. An eligible employer is a euphemism used under the workers' compensation statute to say you are protected by the workers' compensation bar, what they call the exclusive remedy provision. Okay. Now, if you are an eligible employer, you cannot be sued by an injured person on your job site because they are trading that right for the ability to have all of their medical problems covered under a no-fault basis. It doesn't matter if it's 5% their fault or 95% their fault. It's a no-fault system. You get covered if the accident happens at work. Okay. Well, we had a quirk in there that created something called an action over claim. And essentially, if you can't see this on the computer screen, you should have came in person. Okay, you got general contractor up here and a subcontractor down here. Subcontractor's employee is injured. Workers' compensation bar says he cannot sue his own employer. And in every single other industry in the state of Utah, that injured worker would be compensated by workers' compensation, and that's it. However, only in the instance of a construction site or a mine, which also uses, oil, mining, gas, that kind of stuff, where you have a subcontractor situation on site, multi-employers on site. This injured employee cannot sue his own employer. He gets fully compensated by workers' compensation, but then is allowed to go around and get another bite at the apple and sue the general contractor for additional compensation. And the reality was that wasn't a very good option for the employee, but it worked out well for the insurance companies and particularly for the personal injury attorneys. I affectionately refer to this as the no personal injury attorney left behind provision. But the reality is it was costing millions and millions of dollars in Utah for general contractors. Number one, it's very expensive to insure because in this situation, what happens, general contractor's CGL insurance has to appear and defend that case. Then they tender it also under their indemnity provision in the subcontract back to the subcontractor. And now a claim that their workers' comp insurance already covered is being defended by their CGL policy. So they're getting hit on both policies. And this employee, by just going around the horn, gets a claim against his actual employer. We wanted to shut down that loophole, cut that off. We did a brief look at current open action over claims, just with one insurance company, one adjuster, what the costs were right now. They just pulled the first 6 claims that they have. It was $1.7 million had been spent on defense and settlement costs on those 6 claims. So you extrapolate that out across the entire industry in Utah, it's a big number. Everybody pays higher insurance rates because of these types of claims. And it was getting to the point where if you wanted protection under your CGL policy for this type of claim, you would have a $5,000 deductible for a regular CGL claim. But if it was an action over claim, you had a $100,000 deductible because they were just sick of dealing with them. I would assume that every general contractor in this room has at least one or has had in the recent past. So we got together and said, you know what, we need to fix this. And the thing that we needed to fix was the original statute that you can see here down here, highlighted in red. That language has never changed. There's a very clear pronouncement. It's up at the very top, and it says, if the conditions of subsection 7F3 are met, an eligible employer is considered an employer for purposes of 105, that's the exclusive remedy provision, of the contractor, subcontractor, and all persons employed by the contractor or subcontractor. That's pretty clear, right? And that's how it was originally written, and that's how it still reads today. Unfortunately, many years later, the provision that's in the second box was inserted, and it said, this is the changed version, but what it added in was the word notwithstanding in the first sentence. That's what we deleted, was the word notwithstanding, because it used to say notwithstanding, and I'm paraphrasing here, the very clear definition of eligible employer that has protected construction companies for years and years and years. We're going to go ahead and allow injured employees of subcontractors to sue the general contractor. So we just deleted that. Originally, we deleted the whole thing. There was some pushback. Well, we took this idea originally, we brought this up and we were told that's impossible. Trial lawyers would never go for that. Who's going to pay for the second homes and, things like that. Labor Commission said, absolutely not. Workers' compensation. No, we're opposed. But Joey has just the best ability to just keep working with people, keep working, keep meeting. And eventually this came to the House with Timothy Hawks, who, if you've got a bad opinion of the Utah legislature, just spend 5 minutes with this guy and you'll change your mind. He is great. I'm going to grab my drink real quick. Allergies are
Joe needs a hit of Mountain Dew to keep him going.
gotta keep upright. This came up. We met with all the people involved and we explained this situation. Labor Commission then said, we had no idea. Workers' compensation said, we don't like it, but it probably is the right policy. So we charged forward. And when we got to the House and the Senate, we did not drop one single vote. It was unanimous all the way through. Every committee, every floor vote, all the way, unanimous. It's a major win. But in order to keep it, you're going to have to do some very important things here. They're highlighted on this page. Now, I want you to write down or highlight 34A-2-111. That's 111. Okay? It is not automatic. The reason that we had to make a few changes to our original bill is the Labor Commission was concerned that we were going to give this benefit, which is a tremendous benefit, to bad actors, that contractors who were not following safety processes, who were not collecting workers' compensation insurance certificates or waivers, would be benefited just as much as the ones that are putting in the effort. So they wanted to emphasize this point. And so, sorry, got some sniffles from the cottonwood trees in my backyard. So the requirement is you do get protection of the workers' compensation bar, but only if you adopt a safety program that meets the requirements of 34A-2-111. So what I want you to do is with your safety folks, your management, whoever it is, go pull up that statute. It's down in section 3D. There's a description of a safety policy, and it has a review provision and what you need to do to track it. It's basically you keep a 300-day log, those kind of things. But most of us probably meet this, but make sure you do. And do whatever you need to do to make it very clear that you can just pull out a piece of paper and hand it to UOSH or anybody else and say, yes, we meet this requirement. You've got to adopt a safety program and a policy that complies with that section. Then you need to post it at your job site. I think we all do that anyway. Then you need to enforce it. Now, this is probably one of the places that this is going to come into conflict. And I always tell everybody on this, we only get to keep what we're willing to defend. We may have to defend it in court. We likely will, but that's okay. Excuse me. That it's going to come on the enforcement provision. Take a look at the OSHA requirements for graduated enforcement, okay, on an unavoidable employee misconduct claim or any other type. They have a graduated enforcement policy where essentially I give you a verbal warning, then I give you a written warning, then I give you a knock on the back of the head, then I send you home, and whatever it is, your graduated enforcement, you've got to keep records of it. You need to be able to demonstrate through records, I am enforcing my safety program. A lot of people think if I keep records of safety violations, I'm actually just showing that we're working unsafe. It's not true. If you keep those records, then you get the safe harbor under this provision and under Utah's multi-employer worksite doctrine. Okay, so make sure that you are complying with these 4 requirements, especially requirement number 4, step 1, 2, and 3. You've got to do all 3. And if you do, and a subcontractor's employee is injured on your site, you will receive now, after May 5th, the benefit of the workers' compensation bar. We believe that will not just reduce a huge amount of personal injury litigation in the construction industry, but also reduce our insurance costs and other claims and problem solved. There's still more work to be done in the workers' compensation arena. There are reforms that need to be made, both for construction companies and for construction workers. And we got a strong commitment from the legislature that they would continue this process to make this an actual functional and reasonable program going forward. Anybody got any questions?
You mentioned that construction was the only industry that faced this problem. Manufacturing did, other industries in the state didn't face this. Why was that singled out in the first place? Do you know?
Yeah, so in the statute, there's all these definitions of employer and this and this and this. And then they go through this long multi-paragraph explanation of when you hire someone to work within your scope of work. And it was the longest definition of it's just construction workers ever. And it was because of that situation where we are statutory employers. Under every other purpose in the law, they treat us as if we are the employer of a subcontractor's employee for safety and everything else. Well, the one thing that we all have is, as a statutory employer, if our subcontractor's employee is injured and we fail to ensure that they have workers' compensation insurance, it automatically becomes a claim against our workers' compensation insurance. And so that dynamic of you could have a claim against a workers' comp policy, even though you didn't have a strict employer-employee relationship, just led to, through court cases over years, and they just codified what had happened in the court cases, them saying, well, you didn't secure the benefits. You just made sure their employer had them, and then you ended up having to cover it. And there was a lot of litigation about what the word secure benefits meant. And so it just kind of went on from there. But the reality is there's not that many situations where you work in an industry and then you hire others who also work in your industry to perform a portion of your work. Pretty much construction and mining is where you end up.
Just one thing to point out, other states, it's pretty common in many other places.
Yeah, so that
work in multiple states and be aware of this.
yeah, sorry to interrupt you. Yeah, so that was a big selling point, as we explained to them, is this is going that way in the country, and every state that touches Utah has some version of this workers' compensation protection, mostly because it was written into most early workers' compensation statutes, and those states just never wrote it out like Utah did. So yeah, Nevada has this, a very strong policy towards this, Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico. I was speaking with an insurance adjuster who covers multiple Western states, and she said, oh yeah, I have more claims in Utah than all of my other states combined. More litigation. So hopefully that will be reduced.
Thank you, Joe. Appreciate that. As you can see, that was a significant piece of legislation we've been working on this year. And just to add some drama to it, our bill, this House Bill 355, made it through the House, made it through the Senate. We were about, 4 days out, I think, Joe, roughly, give or take. It arrives on the Senate floor. It has to go through all the Senate debates. But we were number 71 on the Senate's second reading calendar, and all bills have to be read 3 times. The first one's in committee, second time's on the first reading of the Senate floor in this case, and then it is read a 3rd time. It gives due process to any legislation to have comment and feedback. But anyways, we're about roughly about 3 days out of the ending of the session, number 71 on the second reading calendar. With that, man, there's no way this is going to go through.
Sat there for days.
Yeah, it just sits there and you're just like miserably watching. It's like watching a bad football game. But anyways, so we're watching it, made some calls, started engaging AGC membership and getting calls made into leadership to see if we can get that moved higher up the calendar. They do a sifting process where they take all of the bills that are on the calendar, they send them all back to rules, and it gives the opportunity for the Senate body to kind of prioritize what bills they want to have heard. Because again, they have to be heard in order. You just can't pick and choose. It's like, oh, well, I really like number 71. Let's go to that one next. They go in that sequential order. But anyways, they did the sifting, went back to rules. We're able to get that back on the calendar. the second to the last day of the session, and they put it number 8 on the list. So again, it was in large part to the work that you as AGC members were doing. I know that we did send out made a couple of phone calls to some individual folks to get some other, what I'd say, organizations on board supporting this legislation, and then of course making those calls to leadership to make sure that we got it as a priority. So again, good win, great win for the AGC, and again, thank Joe for all the work and effort he helped and assist on that as well.
And if I can just add, if you get an email from Joey saying, I need you to email your senator or representative about this issue, please do it. We are that, by the time we do that, we are desperate. We are at a point in which this is a make or break. We need to show, they want to see that the whole construction industry is on board. This isn't just one company or one person trying to create this sweetheart situation. They want to see broad-based support. So when you get that email, that's not just, oh, well, we got to keep in contact with our folks. We are in desperate need of you to email your senator or representative to let them know this is a broad construction industry-wide supported bill. And so folks did that this time,
Yeah.
and it worked.
Yeah, well, thanks for that. Yeah, again, in most sessions, you're not going to see or me sending out that type of an email because again, with the lobby team that we do have, our reputation, most of the time we're not sending out those urgent calls unless we're seeing something that says, hey, we have to get this thing moving. So again, thanks to your work and effort, and thanks for that plug there, Joe. Appreciate that. The other one I'll mention is Senate Bill 152. This is vehicle load penalty amendments. Again, construction, we believe in safety. This is one that, of course, we support, but at the end of the day, what this does is if you do not have a secured load in the state of Utah and you're a commercial operation, which you are, that first penalty is a $500 fine. What they're doing on this particular legislation, they're saying, you know what, if you've been caught once, shame on you. You know, but if you've been caught a second time, you should have learned the first time. And all this does is increases that penalty. So if you've been caught twice within a 6, and being caught, that sounds like the wrong term. That it's not that we're trying to get away with something. If you fail to secure your load, you've been cited the first time, you failed to secure that load a second time within a 6-year window, that penalty increases from $500 to $1,000.
Is it driver specific or company specific?
That is a great question. It typically goes directly to the driver. So again, the adverse side to that, as you know, if there's an injury that occurs on that, again, they typically look at the name on the side of the truck. And again, the citation goes to the individual, but in most cases that additional liability or lawsuits going to you as a company. So just be aware of that. But great question. Yeah, it goes to the individual. The other one, so in most years, it's not necessarily what passes, because again, there's always great legislation, I think, that passes. And of course, some not so good, but I would say our win rate over the last 24 years I've been here has been very, very good. But in often cases, it's the legislation we're out there working against and defeating. Some of it we've mentioned here with regards to Senate Bill 208 on Senator Kennedy's bill is one of those examples. Maybe one of the other examples I'll share is if you're not aware, there's a lot of movement from what is called the Americans for Prosperity group. And you're seeing a huge appetite across not only the country, but here in Utah to really look at the licensure process for Doppel. Construction is part of that licensure process, of course, but it's all of the other licensed groups out there. And you heard some of this in the news and the media. Beauticians is one of those licensed groups. So there's a lot of legislation over the last several years dealing with what I would say kind of deregulation of licensure. And construction, I think, in my opinion, has felt a lot of that over the, I would say, the last 3 years of the legislative session. here in the state of Utah, if you're not aware, there was a bill that was passed last year by Senator Bramble that says if you're an out-of-state contractor working in another state and you have 1 year's experience in that state as a licensed contractor, you can come to the state of Utah and automatically receive licensure. Now, again, I'm using construction as the example, but that's all licensed careers. So if you're a doctor and a CPA, a insurance broker, a realtor, if you're licensed in another state for a year and have 1 year's experience in that state, you come to Utah, you automatically receive licensure here in Utah. And that, again, was a piece of legislation that was passed last year. There's been some rules changes this year with regards to requirements for licensure. As you know, under the rule changes under DOPL, it used to be that you had a practical exam as a licensed contractor. You had to have 2 years of experience, and then you also had to pass the Utah State Business Law exam in order to receive licensure as a general contractor. That's been kind of whittled away a little bit in rules. You still have to have your 2 years of experience. There is no longer a practical exam requirement. And the only requirement now is that you have take the Utah Business Law exam, pass that exam. And then if you're new coming in into the industry as a subcontractor or a general contractor, you have to have a 25 or 30-hour pre-licensure course. Under the rule changes over the last few years, because there is no practical exam required now of general contractors, the state said, well, really, in all intents and purposes, to be an E100 licensed contractor or a B100 licensed contractor, they're the same. So under the rule changes, this last rule construction commission hearing, which was about 4 months ago, they said, if you're a B100 and an E100, their licenses are the same. So if you have an E100 license, you're able to do B100 work. If you're a B100 license, you're able to do E100 work. There's this now, the first executive ordered by Cox, Governor Cox, when he was inaugurated as our governor, his first executive order was to look at licensure in the state of Utah and see how we can, as a state, kind of condense down either licensure or look at if licensure is even required or needed. So AGC in the next month is going to be meeting, or we have scheduled meetings with our friends at DOPL, and the director there at DOPL is, or the manager at DOPL there is Chris Hill, and the director of DOPL there is Mark Steinagel. We as an AGC have a great relationship with those folks, but they're going to be looking at construction specifically to say, should we be condensing down or consolidating licensure for subtrades? One of the thoughts is, do we have just a one subcontract license trade license? And then do we have one just for general contractors? And kind of condense it to that point. We've had some discussion of area of concern, and we'll continue to have some dialogue there. We don't think that's a good idea, but we're going to have those dialogue and that discussion. With that in mind, if you see on your tracking sheet, there's a House Bill 183. This is Representative Brickland's bill. Her idea is taking that licensure requirement one step further, which is to say, if you have 3 years of experience in any license classification in your state, where licensure in the state, and then you come to Utah, in your state, it's not required to be licensed, but you come to Utah and it is required to be licensed. If you have 3 years experience in that state where there's not a license required, but then come to Utah, you're automatically licensed here in Utah. That's what she was doing under her bill. I had about 2 or 3 conversations with her, and she agreed to hold off on this legislation and what they affectionately call bury it in rules. And so we were able to successfully have that piece of legislation killed for this session, but I promise you it's coming back next session.
Because, I mean, who doesn't think it's a good idea that if I frame houses in Star Valley, Wyoming for 3 years, I'm now qualified to build this building in Utah as a general contractor. I just have to go there and sign up for my license. That is the result of that bill. That absolutely, they don't even dispute that. And the reality is, if you brought it for a vote today, right now, the Utah legislature would probably end all licensure.
True.
All construction licensure, just end it all. Just say, let the market decide. We'll figure out who the good contractors and the bad contractors are. So you can imagine the litigation and the defective work claims and the, you know, and the consolidation of the licenses. All right, well, let's just have subcontractor licenses and general contractor licenses. Because clearly, if you can frame up a curb and gutter, you can frame up a multi-story wood frame hotel. I mean, it's all wood, right? And that's their opinion. That's not a joke. That's their opinion.
It's not the client's opinion. The clients weeded out that with their strict recall process. That they ask everything, not just about your licensing, everything.
Yeah.
So,
Not every time.
not every client,
Yeah, you know.
but one's very concerned about risk.
But that's why we have to just really scrutinize each of these licensing bills, because they are all efforts to kill by 1,000 cuts the licensing and regulatory protection to make sure that we as an industry can say, hey, we are a professional, qualified, we don't have the kind of problems they have in other states, you know. We're a pretty sophisticated bunch. We have something like 5 companies in Utah that do over $1 billion of business a year in construction. There's a reason why. It's because of our framework, it's because of the way that our businesses are set up. Other states don't have that. You don't see contractors from New Mexico out conquering the United States construction market. It just doesn't happen. So we really do have to be mindful of this. It is the thing that's coming. They would, honestly, if they could get it to a vote, it would pass.
Let's say this Americans for Prosperity group is a national group. They're spending money nationwide and lots of money to move this type of legislation. And so it's a continued attack that we continue to try to ward off. But I will be honest, we're losing in some regards to some of the components and pieces. And again, it's just that notion that, hey, let's do away with all licensure. And not only did you see it in this type of legislation this year, but you had that with other groups as well. I mean, you had a piece of legislation this year. I didn't see what the final status of it was, but if you're a nurse practitioner, there was a piece of legislation that said this year, if you're a nurse practitioner, again, under the current law in the state of Utah, you have to have oversight by a general physician. They were saying this year that, you know what, let's do away with that. It shouldn't matter. And I believe that one passed, but to my knowledge, I think that one passed, but I didn't follow it all the way to the end. So again, it's just not our industry. It's in general that you're seeing a lot of movement in that direction. So we're going to be continuing to have some of that dialogue, as I mentioned, with DOPL this year with regards to the governor's executive order. And just know that we're going to continue to probably see this promulgating over the next, I'd say, few years. So be aware of that. If you have comments and feedback on those types of things as we roll those out, again, we can keep you in touch with the folks who are helping make those decisions. The other, maybe the other thing with that in mind, I know our time is well over, but let me just share some future things that we're going to be working on. AGC typically has always taken a defensive stance. Our philosophy with regards to legislation is let contract kind of dictate terms and conditions. Let's try to keep government out of construction and contracting. And so to that end, we've typically have played more of a defensive role. I think with some of the legislation that we see coming forward, we're beginning to rethink, maybe we ought to make some adjustments. The case in point was this House Bill 355 with regards to the workers' comp. We just said, hey, you know, there's some needed changes here. Let's see if we can improve it. We've got, from Representative Hawks, we've got commitment to continue to have additional dialogue on workers' comp coverage issues. One of the easy ones that we think that's out there is, again, in the state of Utah, you have a 180-day reporting time frame. So if I'm an injured employee on a project or in an injured work situation, I can wait 180 days before I even report to you as my employer. and make a claim to a workers' comp claim. We think that's too long. We're thinking, hey, let's at least cut that in half to 90 days, which in 90 days, we're still, I think, the largest, or that's still the longest lead time of any other state, even at 90 days. So again, we're thinking there's some easy ones we can kind of pick off. And again, HB 355 is just that first step. And we're going to continue to look at pieces of that we can kind of rein in and kind of improve. The other ones that we're going to be looking at that we heard from those who are doing vertical construction, it's in Senate Bill 89. Again, Senate Bill 89 deals strictly with the Home Builders Association. But again, they have over the last couple of years made some adjustments and changes within the plan review process and the inspection process. So if you're a residential contractor, you send your plans into the city. They have 14 days to review those plans, get their stamp of approval, and then on the plan, that's on the plan check process. On the building inspector process, they have a 10-day window. Do I have that right, Joe? I think I'm off on that day. 10 days, if I remember right. 10 days for the building inspection. If they don't get their building inspection done on time, they're able to go to a third-party inspector and have the project inspected by that third-party inspection. Now, I know a lot of our folks do the special inspections, but the unintended consequences of the bills that they've ran over the last couple of years are that because they're so now have these time constraints, the cities on the inspection process and the plan check, the commercial construction projects are kind of being put on the back burner because they have all of these time constraints on the front end. We have commitment from Paul Ray, who ran the bill for the home builders this year. They're going to look and see what the process is now. Because again, if you're able to now have that third-party inspection from the home building section or segment, then maybe that's going to open up the building inspectors from those municipalities to do the commercial side. If we find that we're being constrained and our projects are continue to remain on the back burner, we're going to run a bill next year to have the same time limits and the same time allowable to then do our own inspections as well. So we're looking at that this year.
If I'm a municipality, why would I hire building inspectors at this point then? If I could say, hey, I'm going to abdicate my responsibility to the private sector, let them pay for the building inspectors. I'm not having to pay guys anymore because they're doing it. They're going to have to pay for that themselves. What's preventing the municipalities from doing that?
I don't think in my mind, there's probably not. I think it might be, there might be some of those municipalities that say, you know, this is we're spending a lot of money for these building inspectors. It might just be as easy to have it go to the private sector and they may do away with
So
it
they
entirely.
won't reduce their fees, will they?
No, and under this bill, they still have to pay their fee.
They're right, but they don't have to hire a building inspector. to
Correct.
do it.
Correct.
And a lot of municipalities don't have building inspection services. They just don't.
Right.
There's a lot to that.
So we're looking at workers' comp changes. We're looking at the inspection process. We're looking at the other feedback we got as we were looking at this bill. Initially, we were part of the Senate Bill 80, or sorry, we were part of House Bill 89. We were initially in that. If they were really concerned about the AGC and our position on it, and then felt like our projects are more sophisticated, so they asked if we would graciously come out of that piece of legislation. And we said, yeah, we will take ourselves out of the legislation, study it for this year. And then again, if we have to be brought back in, we'll come back in.
And the big one is the elevators.
Yes, that's what I was getting to. Yes.
So one of the things that we want to do now is, hey, let's find the things that are really hurting us and fix it ourselves. And as you guys know, one of the biggest holdups for a project getting occupancy is getting the elevator inspection. Because by state rule, not law, rules, the state has to perform all of the elevator inspections. What we would like to do is transform that into, and they seem to be amenable to this, to private elevator inspectors. Because, you know, the elevators are so proprietary anyway, and they're, you know, it would take us a year or something to get some inspectors qualified and take the test and get their certificate. But if you could call a third-party special inspector for your elevator certificate in order to get occupancy, and a lot of projects would be open on continued elevator inspections after occupancy would still be handled by the state, where they go in and get your little certificate, your little safety certificate. But for construction purposes, to get your construction certificate use, and then to get your occupancy use, you want to write a bill that would allow that to be done either by the state or a private third party who's got the appropriate certificate. And we think there's a number of folks that would be very easily qualified for those certificates and be able to issue those approvals. So,
So we met with Jason Mon. He's the director of the Utah State Labor Commission. They're the state agency that oversees the elevator inspection process. He's committed to spend the next couple of months having that dialogue and see if we could either adjust it by rule or write legislation to get that fixed and changed for the AGC membership. So again, that's one we're going to be working on. The other one we're going to be working on that came as part of another piece of legislation that was passed. You'll see it. I think it's titled House or Boats, RVs. It's a automatic renewal of licensure for license plates, if you know, or registration of your vehicles. There's a commercial fleet auto renewal process on that and a special tag that allows that auto renewal to occur on your fleets. Again, that was a bill we supported, it passed. But with that in mind, we had some feedbacks from some of the AGC membership that said, hey, you know what, we have these fleets where we have our technicians in-house do the inspection. And there they come through, the highway patrol comes through and does a kind of a spot check to make sure those are done accurately and correctly as they're doing that inspection process. However, they have to have it done at a central location. We're looking at a potential piece of legislation next year to say, hey, you know what, if you have a fleet and you have those certified inspectors within your organizations and groups, rather than having vehicles travel hundreds of miles to that kind of the mothership, why not have that technician be able to go out to the various satellite offices and do those inspections? So we're going to be looking at maybe some legislation to help those companies that have those large vehicle fleets also have that ease of inspection process. So again, those are some ideas we're working on for next year. Bills that are going to be coming back, I guarantee, are liens. We successfully defeated a lien bill this year. Prevailing wage comes up every single year. That'll be coming up again, I'm certain, next year. Minimum wage was two bills dealing with minimum wage. As you know, those are an FYI for us on our tracking sheet. If our industry is paying minimum wage, I'd be surprised. So, but there's that movement for a $15 minimum wage. And then the last one I'll mention is apprenticeship utilization. If you don't have apprenticeship programs within your organization, you should be taking a look at them because there's a movement to have apprenticeship utilization. Salt Lake County already has it on a number of their within their statute. Summit County is looking at it on their statutes and books. There's Murray City is the other one that I've heard of, but there's a movement to have a state apprenticeship utilization requirements on projects. So again, something to take a look at there, and I'm certain that's going to be coming back. Kyle, with that said, I could go on forever. I'm a kind of a political geek, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of stuff that we were tracking. This year, we had 30+ bills that we were actively engaged with. And again, we appreciate the membership support, our committee, our legislative team and folks. Is there any questions? I kept you here longer than you needed to be, but is there any questions that you have on any bills on the tracking sheet that we didn't address or discuss? Boy, I got an easy answer for you. So AGC, we have 6 apprentice crafts that we train with. We have a satellite office training facility, I should say, that we use off California Avenue. If you didn't see this gorgeous new building that we're building next door, that's our apprenticeship training facility, our overall training facility. But we have full apprenticeship programs that are approved by the Department of Labor, and will meet any required requirements either through the Department of Labor for transportation or the Salt Lake County ordinances will meet all of those requirements. But we do all of the, we have all the instructors, we provide the in the seat training, if you will, classroom instruction. And then as a joint relationship with the employer, they provide the on-the-job training portion of that as well. But they're great programs. They have what I'd say terrific incentives to be a part of them. As far as and on the highway side, it's a little bit more of a what I'd say rich program because there's some state funding that comes in as part of that. But I mean, childcare is provided, transportation is provided, stipends for hotel stays and stuff. If you're doing the in-the-seat training and are traveling from remote areas, we have that's provided as part of that. So again, the tuition's taken care of through that program. So they also pay employment bonuses. So if you graduate, if you enroll within the program, I think there's a $500 signing bonus you get. You graduate from the program, there's a $1,500 bonus you get. So again, terrific programs that we've established and set up with UDOT on those types, but we also have the vertical side as well. Maybe not as rich as far as some of the benefits are concerned, but both terrific programs. So if you're interested in those, call. We'll be happy to answer any questions on that. And then we have Taylor Smith, who's our apprenticeship training director that oversees all those programs. So great question. Any other questions at all? Geez, thanks for letting me plug the apprenticeship stuff. Yeah.
On the apprenticeship program, when you mentioned those counties, some large cities, you're saying that they're going to require apprenticeships for the projects that they'll be doing.
That's correct. So yeah, under Salt Lake County's ordinance, we looked at that. It was one of those bad situations where they passed the ordinance before they reached out to us to have some dialogue and discussion. And I can just tell you from my perspective and the dialogue and discussion we had, it was a very poorly written apprenticeship program. The way that it was drafted, we met with the attorneys, the Salt Lake County folks, mayor. And after we brought up some concerns and questions, they're like, oh man, we got some major problems and issues. They've dialed some of those in, but I still think there's got some issues and problems with it. But yeah, their ordinance is if you're doing a project that's in excess of $3 million with Salt Lake County, they have requirements of apprenticeship.
We're building a granite library. 10% of all labor hours must be apprenticed hours.
And if you do not, let's say you decide that you don't have apprentices, or you decide you're just going to pay the penalty, there is a penalty. $10 per hour is the penalty.
Not to the employees.
Yeah, not to the employee. Yes, not to the employee. Thank you. So yeah, and again, there's just that movement moving forward, and it's going to continue. My thought and idea is, again, this is the third year they brought up the apprenticeship utilization. My idea and thought is Senator Hinkins is the one that's been pushing this one, is come up with an ordinance, because we support as an industry, we support apprenticeship. We think it's a great idea, a great concept, as long as it's drafted correctly. And our idea is maybe come up with model legislation that these counties and cities could utilize, that is passed by the state legislature, that they can now then adopt as a city or a county as their own program. And that's kind of the idea and concept I've tried to sell Senator Hinkins on. And he says, yeah, that's a great idea. I've talked to the labor groups and the unions, and they said, yeah, great idea. But the problem that many legislators have is they have other jobs and lives, and they end up rolling it out the first week of the session again, just as they drafted it the year before, and they wonder why I'm opposed to it. I'm thinking, well, it was bad last year. It's still bad this year. And we've not met in the interim to kind of have some dialogue on how to improve it. So a lot of this stuff's done during the summer and during the interim on the drafting of legislation, and that's why and then it goes through the process. But on the apprenticeship side, yeah, I mean, there's a big national and state movement on that. As far as apprenticeship utilization, I'm not aware of it. I'm sure there are other states. I've not done any research to see what they've done. I know Colorado has had some terrific success on workforce development with regards to some of the apprenticeship. There's been legislation over the last 2 years. Last year or 2 years ago, there was a legislative bill that was passed. We now have a commissioner of apprenticeship here in the state of Utah that's ran through the Department of Workforce Service. Her name is, the commissioner there is Mcallister Stark, a terrific asset to the state. She's in the process now of basically looking at what apprenticeship programs are available what programs might be beneficial to the state, and then looking at how they as a DWS and a commissioner can improve the programs that are out there currently existing. Right now, I will say construction is really kind of the Cadillac of apprenticeship. And because they've been around for so long and we've been doing them for so long, that many of the other programs, which are tech, nursing, medical, they have a long way to go to kind of catch up with us. And so that's kind of what she's trying to do, is trying to figure out the catch up. And most of the legislation you've seen passed over the last couple of years have really been defining what an apprentice is, what pre-apprenticeship is, what internships are, and how do high school students get in the process. And that's really what they've been doing right now on some of that definition, really defining some of those now. So then they can start working on some of the bigger pieces. A great question. Other questions or comments? Well, thank you for coming. We appreciate you being here. Again, this will be on YouTube. I know I've just been exciting and a plethora of information. You'll want to watch it again. Maybe not me, but Joe.
with our families.
Yeah. Yeah, do it as some kind of a family night or something like that. I'm sure it'd be awesome. Yeah, there you go. Friday night, date night. Thanks again.
Thank you.